Everybody, welcome back to Video Game S. So, taking out a fun and interesting episode for you guys this evening. As you'll see, we've put the Super Sega text over the MARS FPGA when we say MARS goes here one day, because over the weekend, another FPGA project was announced. I received a press release in my email about 48 hours ago, and I've been kind of picking through it, thinking about it and whether or not it would make a fun video. So I decided to go ahead and do it because I've been getting a lot of messages in the background asking what I think, so I figured I would do that here. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel something fun to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But a new team in Spain has announced that they're working on a new FPGA project that will run everything Sega up through Dreamcast. And obviously we've been talking about Dreamcast a couple times on the channel, with the MARS FPGA team stating that they're making a Dreamcast core as well. It seems like Dreamcast is the aspirational goal of a lot of different companies, and obviously FPGA proliferation is here because there's so many different projects announced. I cannot keep up with making videos on all of them, nor do I really want to, but this one seemed kind of interesting just because they had reached out to different channels to talk about this. So what they've announced so far is a paper design, and they're stating plainly as such. They're just saying that there is not a prototype working yet, which is totally fine. We understand that it is just a PDF document, but they're stating that it will play Dreamcast. No word on NAOMI, but obviously Dreamcast and NAOMI are so very similar, you would expect one might beget the other. There's obviously a ton of fun games on Dreamcast, and again, it just seems like everyone wants to get that Dreamcast FPGA device out the door first. That makes sense because it is still, in my opinion, Sega's best console of all time, and there's so much fun to be had on it, so you could see why people would really want to kind of be the first company to hit that mark. Again, I'd love to see some NAOMI stuff going on here. It's been mentioned in different projects, but for me, this is actually the system I think would benefit from FPGA versus Dreamcast, because again, a Dreamcast with a GDEMU in it and some sort of modification is not the most expensive thing. It is pretty easy to access. But let's take apart this announcement and talk about what's going on here, because it is quite vague in its detail and some things don't really make much sense to me. So you guys can talk in the comments down below as to what you think. The team is just a bunch of guys born in their 70s and 80s that are in Spain. That's kind of how they are announced, and it says it's going to play every system from SG-3000 all the way up to Dreamcast games. Obviously all of those cores exist. It doesn't really say if they're writing them themselves or borrowing from open source, but you can obviously play Sega Saturn today on MiSTer FPGA. That core has been around for a while now, still in development, so obviously getting a Sega Saturn FPGA core stood up and running is not going to be an impossibility, because we already have that on MiSTer FPGA. And honestly, outside of Dreamcast, everything this proposed Super Sega system is going to run is already running here today, so it's not like they're really doing anything that hasn't already been done. That's not a negative, I'm just stating that we already have cores for all these systems up through Dreamcast. Obviously Sega Genesis has been around for a very long time. We just got the Nuke core, so there are still innovations going on the Sega Genesis side as well. It is definitely something you can play, but it makes sense that someone would want to do a system that ran every single Sega console, because Sega stops at the Dreamcast. So once you get that buttoned up, you can really ship one box that has absolutely every single Sega console in it, and that is just kind of what they're proposing here, including SG-3000 and Master System, which if you've played them before are fun, but I feel like that's obviously not the draw here. They have 3 different cartridge slots on top, as well as a CD and DVD-ROM around the side, but I would highly presume that would have to be for dumping discs to some sort of internal storage. I don't really think that they'd be running the actual games off of that, would be my presumption at least. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think. Now if we take a look at the rendering of the actual console that they're planning, you'll see that it's definitely inspired by a lot of different Sega consoles, and they have a cartridge slot for pretty much everything, but oddly enough no mention of the Sega 32X. They say every Sega system up through Dreamcast, so 32X should be here somewhere. And interestingly enough, the controller ports are upside down here. Honestly, ports work no matter what orientation you put them in. You can put them at a 90-degree angle. It is just a port, it doesn't really matter, but it seems like they're going for both a DB9 port as well as USB, and they talk about 8-player control, which really isn't hard, especially over USB with a hub. Something like MiSTer FPGA, you can run as many controllers as you have friends, and I'm guessing you have more controllers than friends. That is a joke, I'm not insulting you, but the DB9 port makes sense because that is pretty much the standard for the Sega Genesis, so you'd assume there must be some sort of snack in here. But again, we're working on very little details, and it seems like lately people love to announce these new projects with renders and just like a 2-page PDF when people really do want to see details. I am not knocking Super Sega, I'm not knocking anybody, I'm just saying I'm really struggling to understand why all of these new designs go out with just the most rudimentary of information. I would absolutely wait until I had something to show. I really wish that was kind of the case here on these new projects. They talk about using FPGA as well as ASIC. That's a little bit confusing to me. Maybe it's just a language barrier. FPGA would be what you're using for this. And then they show off an FPGA board over to the right. And if you're not aware of the different makers of FPGA hardware and all these development boards, it might not look super familiar to you, but it was easy to track down for the most part. Like 5 people in Discord found it within 5 minutes, and it would have taken me about 5 minutes as well to figure out what it is. So let us show you. This is definitely not what would be in this box. This is the Vertex Ultra Scale 56G. This is a $19,434 board. Let's just round that up to $20,000. Clearly this is not what would be going in any proposed system whatsoever. The only way people would spend $20,000 for a game console if it also came with 4 wheels and a motor that you could either take on the lake or drive on the street. But it's possible they could be using a board like this to kind of develop cores in the background, and there's so many different connectors on this that just would not be relevant for any sort of gaming purpose. This is a development board for networking devices, and most of the connectors are going to be for very intense networking operations. Basically everything I'm circling here really wouldn't be any sort of use for any sort of game development purposes whatsoever. Take something like the Triassic DE10 Nano, has absolutely everything a core developer needs and really nothing it doesn't. We've got HDMI, we've got USB, we've got Ethernet, and a power jack. That's really all you need outside of those GPIO pins to be able to stand up an FPGA gaming device. So something like that ultra scale board in the PDF cannot be what they're using shipping in a box. Now as far as the team is concerned, they did list a few different people, and while I'm not going to show you all the research I did because it is digging into people's lives, I will tell you right now I am very good at finding details online. I know a lot of people in a lot of countries, so getting information is quite easy. That person does exist, they do work as an engineer, so it seems like at least they would have some sort of knowledge on how to do these things. And they're saying that they're not taking any money until they have a working prototype, but then they say they have a few Dreamcast games playing so far. Here's the thing that drives me nuts about these projects. I'm not being negative, I'm just being honest. If you're going to state that you have a few games running, just show it to people. It doesn't matter if it's at 4 frames per second, it doesn't matter if everything is graphically corrupted. People want to see, because when you just send out a paper release, 9 times out of 10 everyone that sees it is going to say vaporware, because that is what the most logical conclusion would be. I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that this might not come to fruition. It's very possible it does, but if you have a gigantic prototype wired up with massive boards running something at 4 frames per second, I just want to see the thing. I constantly show off hardware on the channel. I show off my janky homespun, good for one use harnesses for all of my arcade hardware. I show in-depth shots of all of the electronics. If you're going to build something and you say it's running a couple games right now, then please just show these things to us, because that is what people want to see. And they're talking about the fact that they've been working on a Sega Saturn core from a few years ago, but only recently did FPGAs come onto the market that are able to run Sega Saturn. At least that's how I'm reading it. The language is definitely not English native, and that again is confusing to me, because we've been playing Sega Saturn FPGA for over 18 months now. Granted, it is not finished, it is still a work in progress, but outside of that Dreamcast, there's nothing that they want to run in this perspective box that cannot be done today on MiSTer FPGA. So I really don't know what to take of this Super Sega project, but I know you guys want to know about it. It's as likely that it never sees the light of day as that it becomes a finished product. You'll just have to wait and see the next information that comes out, and some prototypes and some working demos. They're not taking money yet, and that is always good, but if they go to the stage of taking money without having working prototypes shown to a bunch of people, I think that's when I would tell you about it in a video. But apparently there's another FPGA device, at least on paper, coming, and those are the details. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.